Hello, I'm Dave Reilly and welcome to What a Relief. We're going to try something a little different. We're not going to have a project per se in this segment. I'm going to try to answer some of the more common questions that I'm asked from time to time. These are the basic questions. Some of these questions may have been answered in previous issues, but if you've missed those, or maybe it's good that we just cover some of these subjects again. The first, and I think probably is the most common question that I get after, am I going to cut myself, is what are the right tools for me to get? And I'm afraid there is no really very easy answer on that. The determination about what type of tools you're going to have to use depends upon what type of carving you're going to do. But I'd like to just show you the different types of tools, and I can tell you about how what type of carving that they're used for and how they're handled and so on, and this perhaps will help you to make a choice. Now, the first and the most common for serious carving are what we refer to as the mallet tools. Now, the first and the most common tool is what was referred to as a mallet tool. These are what a lot of people refer to as the professional tool. You don't have to be a professional to use these. These are driven, however, either with a mallet, is why they get their name, or they're used by hand. Now, this is the most common. They come in a very wide range of sizes and shapes. Again, it depends upon the type of carving and the size of the carvings you're going to do. Obviously, you're not going to use a very small tool such as this to carve a cigar store Indian or the entire front of an armoire. On the other hand, if you're doing very, very small work, you're not going to be using the very large tool. So right from the beginning, the scale of your carvings and the detail of your carvings will dictate to a great extent the type of tools and the size of the tools that you will be using. The other type, for smaller work, is referred to as a palm tool. And they get their name because they are held directly in the palm. There's three different types generally that's on the market. There is the most common, the traditional, that has the straight handle, almost like a small screwdriver handle. The other type goes back to the wood engraving days, where you had this mushroom style of handle. I don't find it very nice to use. If you're doing very small work, this works fine. And nowadays there is a newer, more ergonomic appearing handle, and it's very, very comfortable, and it's a very good quality tool. Now, these are held in one hand. They're guided frequently with your other hand. Again, we're going to follow the same rule as we do for all types of carving tools, is the 3-point, where you hold the tool, you guide it with the other hand, and then the hand rests on your work or on a surface. You don't work free, you just keep working such as this. Now, these tools are generally used only in your dominant hand, generally your right hand. If you're left-handed, the technique is exactly the same. But if you're right-handed, you usually don't use them in your left hand, whereas with the larger mallet tools, they are held in the right hand, and they can be held just as well in the left hand. So that makes them somewhat more versatile. Those are the type of tools that you would generally run across. Again, they come in a wide range of sizes, shape of the tool, and so on. The other tool that you would be using, not as much for the relief carving that we feature here at the magazine, but you do use it, but for small figure carving and such, you use the typical carving knife. You'll see these in catalogs listed as bench knives or chip carving knives, as well as calling them carving knives. This shape that we have here is, for your first tool, certainly, this is the ideal shape to use. This is probably more versatile than all the others. There are others. Again, remember, the type of tool that you're going to use will be determined by the type of carving that you do and your style. Now, there are times when I might recommend a selection of tools for a student, depending upon the type of work they're going to do. And they find that a few of my selections, they don't care for them. They don't fit or as comfortable or as easy to use as a different size or a different shape. It is very, very personal, your choice of tools as well. So to conclude, a few more words of wisdom here. The first thing is that, as you can see, your carving is going to dictate the type of tools that you have. Now, you may start out with a small selection of tools. I don't recommend you buying a whole set of tools. The best thing to do is buy a small selection, 3 or 4 tools to get yourself started. And then from there, as you do your carving, the carving is going to tell you what tools you are going to need. It'll become very obvious, and the advantage of this is as you continue in your carving, you will be collecting tools which match perfectly your taste, your style, and the type of carvings that you're going to do, so that as you continue, as I have sometimes on a large carving, I may have 40 or 45 tools laid out on the bench for a very large, complex carving, but I am using all of them. I have very, very few tools that I simply do not use. Another trick or a suggestion that I got from Chris, the editor of our magazine, is that if you have an opportunity to take your carving to the store where you're buying your tools, and then you can select tools that really fit the carving that you're doing. It's kind of a handy way of doing it. The other thing is, if you ask a lot of questions, talk to other carvers, join a carving club if you can, ask questions and see what they do. You'll get some very, very good suggestions and some very good answers to your questions. However, they will probably be all very contradictory. Everybody has their own way of doing it. I have my way. Some other carver might suggest a different type of tool. So the ultimate choice is up to you, and listen to your carving. It really is going to tell you the correct tool to use. Well, we'll call this segment Sharp Tools That Won't Cut. And why is that the case? Now, I've had many a student come to me and complain that their tools are really very, very sharp. They show them to me. Yes, they are very, very sharp, but they don't seem to be cutting. In fact, they don't cut at all at times. Well, this is a very simple reason, and it's a very simple solution to dealing with it. It's called roundover. Now, we've talked about this in earlier issues when we did the segment on sharpening, but I think it really does bear repeating. Now, normally you have with your tool, you want a perfectly flat edge on your tool. The bevel has to be perfectly flat, so that when you're doing your carving, you rest the tool on the flat, and then by just imperceptibly lifting, it starts to do its cutting. And everything is fine. And you touch it, you feel it, it is sharp, you cut your finger on it, everything seems to be right, and it is cutting well. Eventually, however, as you strop the tool on your leather strop after sharpening, what is happening is the front edge is slowly beginning to round over, because the leather or the soft material that you're using for a strop actually flows up and around the front of the tool. So now what happens is we have this rounded edge. You lay your tool on your bevel, and you have to keep raising and raising and raising until it finally starts to cut. So why it's not cutting is because you have instinctively laid your tool on the correct bevel as you normally do your cutting, but this area here is not touching the wood yet. Then you have to start rounding over until it cuts. So the answer to that is you have to go back to a stone, regrind the front, or resharpen the front so that you get a nice flat bevel. This bevel here has to be kept nice and flat. Then you can start your stropping on both sides to remove that hair edge that you normally have, and then everything will cut again. Sadly, as you continue to strop, you will start to develop this rounded edge again, and eventually, no matter how careful you are going to have to go back to a stone and get your bevels perfectly flat. Then the sharp tools will do your cutting. Now, another problem that many carvers come to me for is how to develop their design to get it into a format so that they can start and put it on the wood and do their carving. Now, there's different ways. Of course, you can purchase other carvings to use as your models and so on, but a lot of the design work is just doodling on a sheet of paper. Now, a suggestion that I always have is to use a piece of gridded paper, such as this, that you do all of your sketching, but once it's done and you're satisfied as to what you want to do, it's already gridded. From there, you can scale it up and scale it down. We've covered this in earlier issues, and so I'm not going to go into any great detail now. But work on a gridded pad. For example, if I were thinking in terms of doing a clover, I can just rough this out as quickly as I want. We'll do a 3-leaf clover in this case. And now it's on a gridded paper, and I can take it from there. Now, using this carving that was featured in an early article, and admittedly we've now magically gone from a 3-leaf to a 4-leaf clover, once it is laid out on the wood, some of the students have difficulty visualizing what it's going to look like in 3-dimension. What I suggest in that case is to use modeling clay, the type that you get in a craft store, particularly the type that does not harden, stays flexible. And you cut out the shape that from your pattern, and then to illustrate how these corners roll up, it's just a matter of actually rolling up these corners. And now you can get a good visualization of what happened and what caused this end of the carving and why it looks the way it does. It's a very good way of visualizing. Now, one final thought on this is that one of the advantages, or many advantages, of working in the plastic modeling clay is that if you model it in 3-dimension before you start your carving, you will have become intimately familiar with every detail because you've been forced to actually make this early on. And the other advantage is that sometimes a handwritten or sketch converted into 3-dimension isn't quite what you want. The modeling clay that you can readjust, you can change it, you can add and subtract, stretch and compress it to get exactly what you want. Now you will have your final shape so that you can start your carving with some element of success. Oh, golly, now what have I done? Now, didn't that sound familiar? I'm sure we've all gone through that. You know, there's 2 types of wood carvers, those who have ruined a carving and those who are going to ruin a carving. So if you do chip out something such as I have here, all is not lost. There are little techniques that you can use that will fix it up, and no one is going to be the wiser for it. Now, the first thing to remember to do is don't play around with the chip. Save it. The important thing is don't touch the area that was where the break occurred. These fibers have all been torn out, they're loose, and if you leave them undamaged, the part will generally fit back just like a nice tight fitting piece of a puzzle. Now that we have the piece that we have to glue in, a little word of caution is when you're doing small, delicate work and there's a good chance of breaking a piece off, keep your area clear. If this piece drops in among the chips, you just may not find it. So be careful, keep your work area clean. Now, there's different ways of gluing these broken pieces in. If you are in a hurry, or if it is a rather delicate piece that has to be held in position while it sets up, using the super glue is the way to go. But a word of caution, the super glue can be very hazardous. It's a good idea to have safety glasses on, because if you should splash a little, it could be really very serious. And also be careful not to get yourself too attached to your work it's very easy to glue yourself up, and then you have a real problem on your hands. Otherwise, using the ordinary yellow carpenter's glue is fine. Now, if you have kept this surface clean, where it's going to go back together, it'll fit together almost perfectly like a jigsaw puzzle, and it probably will not even need clamping. So it's just a matter of, it only takes a small drop just probably a half a drop for this size, set it in place and press it down. And in this case, that won't require any clamping at all. Generally, these are set and it's usable after about 45 minutes to an hour, and you can continue. A lot of other glues are fine, the hide glue, epoxies, and so on. But the important thing is, when you do break a piece off, keep it nice and clean, don't disturb the broken surface, and it'll glue back together and you'll have really good success. Now, all of the relief carvings that you do probably will require that you reduce the background. Sometimes that's called grounding, where you lower the background and get it nice and smooth or textured, depending upon your work. To do that is kind of difficult. You can use a router, or if you're very elegant, you can use a computer-controlled router that you saw in the last issue. But if you're going to do it by hand, logically you would assume that you're going to just go with the grain and do it as you would do the finishing. But you'll find that if you go across grain using a fairly deep gouge, you can get a lot of wood out very quickly and then go back and just do the finishing. And here, let me demonstrate. Now you see, going across the grain, I'm using a number 9 by 15 millimeter gouge. I can go nice and deeply, and you can see how easily I can remove that background. It goes very rapidly. The advantage is you have no problem with grain. You're going across the grain, so you don't have to worry about whether you have to go with or against the grain. The other advantage is these chips, as you see here, they all are very crumbly. They're not stringy of the type of chips that you get when you go with the grain. So by going cross grain, you can get a lot of wood out very quickly. Then you can come back and then you can do your finishing. You can do a lot of finishing, in fact, across the grain to get the level that you want. Then, if necessary, you can do your final tooling by going with the grain. It's a great time saver because you're going to have to do some reducing of the background anyway on any of your carvings. I hope that these suggestions and ideas have been helpful for you. If you have any other questions or questions for us, feel free to email them to us and we'll be glad to address them. Thank you for watching. I'm Dave Reilly for Woodworking at Home.